I had this whole presentation plan, but then I've been thinking about glow-in-the-dark pets, shedding DNA, and a tablet that I'm going to get from a cereal box someday, so I'm a little distracted. But it's good to be here, and I'm glad Nate's here because, I drew the short straw. I have to speak before, the big data talk from Nate. But I think he and I talked, and he agreed that you all would be 42% more likely to enjoy my presentation than his, so we'll see how that goes. Just kidding, Nate. For those of you who saw Becky Bond yesterday, from Credo talk, I would just also like to say amen. And a lot of what I'll be talking about will be related to what she said and what some other folks, have talked about. I think everybody in this room, well, almost everybody. I did watch. I'm a little jet lagged because I was flying here from overseas yesterday, but did watch some of the talks yesterday. I think everybody in this room, or maybe not quite everybody, cares deeply about and believes in democracy and about increasing civic engagement and making civic participation more important. For me, this has been something that it's been my life passion for the last really 14 years. As a community organizer, as a political organizer, as a labor organizer, this is what I've done. Civic engagement, participation, how do we bring more people into the political process? And I saw it firsthand in Boston. I was working with these kids about 14 years ago who were trying to get more money put in their inner city schools. And it was in the churches of Roxbury and Dorchester when I saw 700 people being recruited by these young folks, constituents, to come and then invite their council members to the events and then watch these kids debrief what they had done and see in them, in their eyes, in their faces, what it felt like to be powerful, what it felt like to change the world, to turn the world as it is into the world as it should be. For me, it was the first time I'd ever seen that. As a poor kid growing up in a trailer park, it was the first time I'd ever felt that same kind of power, that we could actually change the world. I also believe that everybody in this room, or most everybody in this room, believes in the power of technology and digital innovation to change the world, to increase participation in our democracy, and to democratize the way we campaign, the way we govern, and the way we interact with one another as citizens. I also think most everybody in this room believes in the power of big data analytics and its potential to change the world, to help us solve the world's biggest problems, and to look at the biggest solutions out there. But I would venture to say that many of you, and I'm certainly one of them, also has serious and deep doubts and reservations and questions and even fears as campaigners, as practitioners, as analysts, as leaders about how we'll use data analytics and technology in the future, and whether or not our use of big data and new technology will actually lead to increased civic participation and a thriving democracy. I left my iPad on the plane too, so that's why I'm going old school with the notes. So we have those fears. My fears come from years of experience within political campaigns, mostly presidential political campaigns, and from what I see as a misunderstanding of the story and the narrative that's been told after the campaign. What I see missing is a full understanding of the way that we integrated data analytics and big technology into a broader and deeper, hyper-local, relationship-based campaign. Big data did not win the 2012 election. Technology did not win the 2008 election. People did. The 2012 post-mortem media obsession with data analytics has been about how big data enables us to predict outcomes. It's been about which piece of technology contains the secret sauce that any campaign or any person can buy off the shelf and then sell. What's much more important to me than predicting outcomes is how we can use data to actually change outcomes. What's more important to me than how technology can be used to rank order our voters, or how it can be used to integrate complex databases, is how we actually use that technology to give millions of volunteers access to those databases, to more effectively use their time to lead to a deeper, more personalized, relationship-based community organizing at the neighborhood and constituency level. We didn't build a persuasion model on the Obama campaign because there were a bunch of geniuses in a cave. Those brilliant minds in that cave built a persuasion model because they were smart enough to realize that they needed to have the brilliant minds of the millions of volunteers and staffers in battleground states across the country to build a true persuasion model. Together, they designed a grassroots program, one that was equal parts person-to-person, relationship-based conversations, and another part analytical experimentation, where thousands of volunteers had hundreds of thousands of conversations with people to figure out how we could then have a list of folks that they could talk to, have relationships with, and persuade in a meaningful way for the rest of the campaign. Our people weren't just talking about data predictions, they were helping to change them. They were helping to change the world as it was and turn it into the world in which they wanted it to be. We used those conversations to build a model in order to give volunteers better lists to talk to. We used those conversations to build our voter registration targeting so we could make sure that every person on their block had the opportunity to vote. And we used those conversations to build a get out the vote model so that we could make sure every person on their block had the opportunity to exercise that right to vote. The danger in our post-campaign analysis is that few have stressed the primacy of the integration or of the human beings behind the analytical models, or the human beings who talk to the human beings who are in those analytical models. Data analytics done in a silo is not necessarily good for democracy. In fact, it can easily devolve into individualized marketing campaigns with one-way communication from a centralized campaign headquarters to passive subjects sold politics as a product. At its worst, the analysis after the campaign read something like this from the Wall Street Journal. This is what they took from it, from the campaign. Marketing politicians is now like selling drinks. It involves filtering policies and voters through algorithms. This is why it took me so long and several years to fully embrace the democratizing power of data analytics and technology. You see, as a Divinity School organizer, graduate who was involved in politics as a community organizer, I wondered on my first national presidential campaign why it felt so disturbingly different than the organizing I did with those students back in Boston. In my early political campaign encounters with data analysts, I bristled as what I saw as a focus on predictive modeling, with almost no mention of the people behind the numbers, or a recognition that we had the power to actually alter those analytical models. The potential for running a soulless marketing campaign was ever present and grows ever present as we move into the future. And honestly, those discussions that I remember my first days of campaigns were often about what it made it easier for campaign staffers and professionals to target voters, to segment them into soccer mom micro-targeting subgroups, and then to create a centralized program towards those voters with little talk about what was good for those voters as citizens, what we could do to engage them in the process, to build real relationships with them, to push them towards deeper participation, and yes, to leave something behind post-campaign in addition to just winning. My fears dissipated as my campaign career matured, and I started to work with digital technologists and data leadership, many of whom are in this room, like Alex Lofton, and Andrew Claster, and Dan Wagner, and Natalie Foster, and Alana Kriegel, who saw the power of data to do exactly what I wanted to do most, to empower and engage people, to move them to vote, to move them to volunteer, to participate in their democracy in a meaningful way. I started to realize that technology and big data can be huge forces in increasing democratic participation. 2.2 million people volunteered, worked at least one shift on President Obama's 2012 campaign. Each one of those volunteers, their experience was enhanced because of our big data and our technology. That data was power. for a volunteer neighborhood team leader. It was no longer just something a paid campaign manager had access to. Volunteers were trained on how to use it, given models and lists to prioritize their outreach, and provided with technology to help them communicate with fellow volunteers and stay connected with the national effort in the movement. That volunteer in Ohio, she had an experience that leads to more volunteerism and more civic engagement. The supporter in South Carolina, who otherwise would have been left out of the presidential political process, was engaged in a meaningful way, thanks to our online call tool, our dashboard, our Facebook targeted sharing app. All of this requires integration and a belief that people and their ability to change predictions, to use technology in empowering ways if it's opened up and accessible to them. It was about how people use the data and the technology, and how those people, in turn, shape those models and those tools. There's a balance as we move forward that we have to strike as we run campaigns, organizations, and progressive movements. We want to win. We need to win. Too many lives hang in the balance. But we also need to win in a way that creates short-term victories and long-term change. I, for one, don't think those things are mutually exclusive. Campaigns of the future have to dig deeper into the lessons of this full-scale integration and fully embrace the nitty-gritty, the non-sexy organizing work that happened in communities across the country face-to-face. My fear is that we'll take the wrong lessons from the last two presidential campaigns. We have to ask ourselves, are we using the best data analytics and technology possible to win now? As leaders with long-term vision, we also have to ask ourselves, are we making democracy better at the same time? For me, this is about more people participating in a deeper way. It's about watching 10,000 volunteer neighborhood team leaders who had been trained and empowered to own a piece of a presidential campaign run Get Out the Vote from their garages, from their homes, talking to neighbors they had been building relationships with for months and sometimes years. Now the question is, how do we transfer that presidential campaign process, especially given the dysfunctional state of our gerrymandered House of Representatives and the 60-vote Senate absurdity? The cynics in the room will walk away saying that hyper-local political engagement at this scale, given the current technology that we have, can only happen on a $1 billion campaign with a charismatic candidate and a national stage backed up by 2,700 field organizers. To those folks, I would challenge you. Come with me to meet with the former 2012 neighborhood team leader in a red district in a red state who is running for Congress. Come with me. Take a trip down to Texas. Meet the 1,500 volunteers who in the last 4 weeks have been deputized as voter registrants in their effort to turn Texas blue over the next several years. Come with me to meet the former organizers and volunteers who are working on gun control issues, who are working on healthcare issues, who are working on gay rights issues, who are working on issues that are important to you across the country. All of those volunteers are using smart data and analytics and cutting-edge technology to run empowering campaigns. They're the future. They're the legacy that matters. In my humble opinion, the change that happened in 2008 and 2012 that started then is only beginning to play out. We seeded and trained a generation of organizers and volunteer leaders who saw the power of civic engagement, and they understand the human element behind it. My question, or rather my challenge to all of us in this room, is how can we inspire more of them and invest in campaigns, organizations, and movements that inspire these organizers and these volunteers, and how we make sure that the story we tell for future campaigners and future generations is one that does not forget these people behind all the data and technology. Thank you.